Hey, Chris here from Faders Music in Brandon, Manitoba, just over at the Ted Good location today. I just wanted to shoot a short video today that you might find handy if you are looking at buying a used guitar, either from us or from online at Facebook Marketplace or something like that. Just a few things that we look out for before we take anything on trade to make sure that the guitar is a good, usable, playable guitar. So I'll start with an acoustic guitar. There's a few obvious things that you want to look for. You can look at the guitar's body over to make sure there's no cracks and stuff like that. Finish cracks aren't always a deal breaker. Sometimes you can have little spidery cracks in the clear coat and stuff like that. And that doesn't necessarily render the guitar unplayable or useless or anything like that. But some of the key things that you want to look for is I always look around the heel here. If this is cracked and sometimes they'll crack and start to separate away from the body a little bit, that'll cause the neck to tilt forward and then the strings to be high off of the fingerboard. Now that's the one thing that everybody's gonna tell you to watch for, is make sure that the strings are not too high off the fingerboard. And that's really good advice, but there's several things that can cause that. One of them being if the heel is cracked and separated from the body. Another one that you can watch for is the bridge. This is called the bridge right here. This is where the strings go in. These little balls have little posts attached to them and they hold the strings in with friction. Something that's pretty common. In our neck of the woods, it gets cold in the winter and really dry, and a lot of times what that'll cause is a few issues. One of which is the bridge can sometimes start to peel off the top of the guitar here. And that's it's a fairly big process to get that fixed. So, I mean, it's usually fixable, but I mean, if you're buying a used guitar and that's something that's happening, if there's a little gap underneath here or if it's starting to lift, that's a bit of a red flag as far as that goes. In more extreme cases, what'll happen is that the whole top of the guitar, I like to look across the top of the guitar like this to make sure it's flat. Sometimes they do have a little bit of a belly on them, which is okay, but if they start to really tilt up like this and sort of hump like this and cave in here, that's a real sign that the guitar is dried out too much, and that's pretty major surgery to get that fixed. So you want to more or less have the top of the guitar be nice and flat and have this stuck down so that it's not lifting off. Now that'll also go a long way to keep the strings low on the fingerboard, because the reason you want them low is because you don't want to have to push too hard to make it, because if the strings are way up here, it's hard to tell from the camera here, but if the strings are really high, you have to push really hard, and that makes it really uncomfortable and not very fun to play. Now, another thing to look for is usually fairly easy to adjust and fairly easy to fix, but another reason that'll cause the strings to be high is the strings have a lot of tension on them, and they're always constantly pulling the neck up like this, which will sometimes cause it to be shaped like a bow. Now, most guitars with steel strings on them have got a steel rod inside the neck called a truss rod, which is adjustable with an Allen wrench, usually in through here. I don't know if you can see that or not. Yeah, there you can see it. Or sometimes it's adjustable from up here. There's sometimes exposed, or sometimes there's a little cover up there, and that you put an Allen wrench in there and that can be adjusted one way or the other, because sometimes they go back the other way when the strings are too low and they're laying on the frets, and that's also a problem. But that sort of issue, if the neck is shaped like this or like that, it's usually not too big of a deal to fix. Sometimes those truss rods get fused and they're hard to or impossible to move, but that's not super common. The best way to check, the way that I always do it, is I look down the neck, kind of like you're looking down a 2x4, and you can just see, if the strings seem pretty, if the neck looks pretty flat, then you're going to be in the right ballpark. And it can be, usually there's a little bit of lift to it, just so that when you're playing up here, there's no fret buzz and stuff like that. But if the strings feel pretty close and the neck looks pretty flat, then you're probably at least in the right ballpark. So those are kind of the main things. I guess another thing to point out is if you run your hands up and down the neck like this, if the frets feel, these little metal things are called frets. I'm not sure if I pointed that out or not. If they feel sharp and kind of prickly, that's also a sign that the guitar has dried out a little bit too much. And that's actually a really easy thing to fix. You can bring any guitar down that's got sharp frets, and we can fix that at the store and make them nice and smooth again. But that can be a sign that maybe the guitar has dried out a little bit too much. Another thing that you can look for is on the top of the guitar. It's hard to tell on a satin sort of finished guitar like this, but on a glossy guitar, especially glossy black acoustic guitars, if you look at it in the light, if it sort of has like a really corduroy sort of look to it, and if you move your fingers across the top like that, if it feels bumpy, then that's also a sign that it's dried out quite a bit. I know I'm harping on this drying out sort of thing a lot, but that's the biggest cause of problems with acoustic guitars in Manitoba and the prairies and stuff like that. You can get little humidifiers that go with guitars for like 10, 20, 30 bucks, which is basically just a plastic shell with a sponge in it that you put with the guitar to keep the guitar humidified in the wintertime. But that's the most common cause of problems with guitars, acoustic guitars especially. Another thing you can look for is the machine heads, the tuning pegs. You want to make sure that they actually move, and when you pluck a string, that they actually will tune the guitar, because sometimes those get worn out or broken and that kind of thing. So I think that pretty much covers it for acoustic guitars, for the things that we look for anyway. Electric guitars, a lot of the things still apply. The bridge, not so much, because these things are usually screwed down. Sometimes they, have a whammy bar that you can, lift up and down to give sort of different sounds. The necks are usually bolted on. Sometimes they're glued in, like this. If you're buying a used guitar for cheap online, it's probably not going to have a glued-in neck, because that's a much more expensive way of building a guitar. So the same things to do with the neck still apply. The main difference with an electric guitar is you want to plug it in and make sure that the electronics work. Now, if the electronics are sort of cutting in and out, the jack here sometimes can be loose, or sometimes, yeah, that's neat looking. It usually is metal, but it's plastic on this one. I like that. Anyway, sometimes this can be loose. That's a fairly easy fix. The pickups, a lot of times if there's no sound, it's not usually the pickup that's the issue. It's probably one of the pots or the switch or something like that. All of that stuff is relatively easy to fix and repair. Just sometimes they need a cleaning, sometimes they need to be replaced. If that's the case, a repair charge on something like that, it can still run you, depending on what needs to be done, it can still run you, maybe as cheap as $15, as much as $100 if we have to start replacing a lot of parts. It's just something to keep in mind if the electronics aren't working. If they're just sort of like scratchy sounding, sort of, that usually just means a cleaning, and that's just a really, really easy fix. Usually we'll do that free of charge for you. And then the same stuff for the neck and the fret supply, machine heads, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the main stuff to look for when you're looking at used guitars on if you're buying a used guitar instead of a new guitar. With all of our used guitars at the store that we sell quite a few, because we take, pardon me, we take a lot of guitars on trade very, very regularly. They always go through a full setup process to make sure that they're basically playing just like a brand new guitar, as close to a brand new guitar, sometimes better. So that when you buy a used guitar from us, you're getting something that is going to hold up exactly the same as what a new guitar would as well. So that's kind of a crash course on kind of what we look for if you're looking for a used guitar. So if you have any questions, you can give us a call at the store, send us a message through our website or anything like that. We're happy to help, and hope to see you soon. Thanks.